Hey guys, your friend Spencer here. Go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe if you're new. We're going to talk about The Tragedy of Compromise by Ernest Pickering. Now this is a book that is actually out of print, and Bob Jones University owns the print. They're actually not printing this book anymore. But the content of this book, I think, is astounding. This is so relevant to what is going on in modern day churches. And what we're going to do over the next few videos, we're going to go through and just give you a lot of the contents of this book and talk about the subject matter of this book. Now, Ernest Pickering was a man who wrote several good books like this, and I recommend all of them. And so go ahead and pick you up one, whatever you see he wrote. I'm for it. I love it. So let's do this. Over the next few videos, let's talk about each chapter. And this book actually has 7 chapters in it. And in this book, we will just go through the introduction and chapter number 1. So let's get with it. Looking forward to a great video with you guys. Now, the opening line of this book is, "It has been said that politics is, quote, the fine art of compromise." And I think that's true, and that's why a lot of Baptist preachers have had a hard time trying to get into politics, because you kind of have to compromise with the other side to get something done. But when it comes to matters of theology and what God said, there is no room to compromise. You can't compromise. It would be sin to compromise. But that's the name of the game today in churches. Churches are cutting corners, they're compromising, they are putting little spins and twists on theology to make it more palatable to the masses. Now, truth be told, I don't know what more I could say about that would give you an indication that this is an assault on the gospel. You can't change the gospel, the way to heaven, to appease fallen man, and you can't do that with really any theology. But that's the name of the game today in churches. We're going to de-emphasize certain things, which is another way they call compromise, so that we can reach the crowd. And compromise in politics, sometimes you have to do that. But when it comes to theology, it's sin to compromise. And there's a story here about a man named Athanasius. And the book says, Athanasius, champion of the complete deity of Christ against the Arians who denied it, was warned by a colleague, quote, "The whole world is against you." Replied Athanasius, "Then I am against the whole world." There would be no compromise for him on a matter so crucial. And in today's age, we have churches that will compromise on major doctrinal issues such as the deity of Christ. The book also goes on to say that W.B. Riley, famous fundamentalist leader and longtime pastor of the First Baptist Church in Minneapolis, in speaking of the Jebusites, Hivites, Amalekites, and assorted other ites, warned that the most dangerous of all were the in-betweenites. These are folks who try to straddle every issue and keep friends on both sides. Dr. Bob Jones Sr. likened them to a man who during the Civil War decided to try to save his neck by wearing a Confederate jacket and Union pants. The Yankees fired at his jacket and the rebels at his pants. He could not win for losing. It does not pay to compromise. And I love that illustration. But the first chapter of this book is called Wolves in Sheep's Clothing. And I want to basically just sum up this chapter for you. In the early part of this book, it talks about the rise of what is called the Enlightenment, which was a philosophical movement that came about in the 17th and 18th centuries, and basically involved things like deism, naturalism, rationalism, and all kinds of isms were born out of the Enlightenment. And this Enlightenment basically embraced things like evolution and things like that. Basically, the Enlightenment was an antithesis to Bible doctrine. You had to reject theology to be enlightened, and it was the giving of light. And in my personal opinion, that has occultic implications and all kinds of things like that. But basically what the book says here is that this Enlightenment created something called theological liberalism. And theological liberalism is what we now call modernism. And modernism is the thing that is infecting the church today. Now, in this book, he gives 9 points of what theological liberalism is. Let me just quote the book to you. Out of the matrix of this European mix of unbelief came the movement known in church history as modernism, now often referred to as theological liberalism. What are some hallmarks of liberalism? Well, here's 9 of them. Number 1, a rejection of the historic Christian doctrine of biblical inspiration. Number 2, a tolerance of all views that come from within the religious community. Number 3, an emphasis upon the validity of human experience over the revealed truth of God. Number 4, a denial of the absolute and unique deity of Christ. Number 5, an emphasis on the dignity and goodness of man. Number 6, a rejection of the total depravity of man and the resultant necessity of the new birth. Number 7, an evolutionary concept of the origin of all things as opposed to a creationist view. Number 8, a rejection of the supernatural interventions of God in human history. And number 9, an emphasis upon the social gospel. That is, that the main mission of the church is to correct societal ills. Sin is essentially social, and thus salvation must involve the correction of these social problems. Now today, theological liberalism manifests itself in wokeness, is what we call it today. People that are trying to do their best to right society's wrongs. And the problem is many of them are willing to sacrifice the gospel of Jesus Christ to do so, or even alter the gospel of Jesus Christ to do so. Anybody who goes woke is a theological liberal and a modernist. You can mark that down. That is 100% fact. Everybody who preaches social gospel and wokeness and critical race theory is a theological liberal. They are a modernist. Now in 1910 there was a man named Lyman Stewart, and he was actually a wealthy oil tycoon, and he said that we need to push back against this modernism in our churches, and he funded a production of a bunch of booklets called The Fundamentals, and those are actually pretty popular for their time. But later on there in 1919 there was an organization that was formed called the World's Christian Fundamentals Association. And W.B. Riley, the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Minneapolis, was the very first president. So you have this modernism and theological liberalism infecting churches, and then this oil tycoon says we need to push back against this, published a bunch of books, and then there was a first formal organization of a group of people pushing back against modernism, calling themselves the World's Christian Fundamentals Association. And also in the Presbyterian denomination, there was a big uproar of fighting back against liberalism, and one of the main men who fought against it was a man named J. Gresham Machen, who was a professor at Princeton, and he actually worked with Billy Sunday when he was alive. And there were other famous names in this controversy in this time, men like William McCarroll fighting Bob Schuller. You also had men like J. Frank Norris, who basically were the faces pushing back against theological liberalism because it had basically taken over everything. Now, the end of chapter 1 ends with a great quote from a man named David Beale. And the quote is this: virtually all spiritual movements have ultimately diminished in vigor and strength of conviction. Truths once held dynamically came to be held on only formally. New leadership emerges that paid no price of suffering. To them the battles have ended. The only true fundamentalist is a fighting fundamentalist. And I love that quote because the spiritual truth behind it is so important for today. We have no ground to compromise when it comes to Bible truth. There is no room to give in to liberals. And I love that quote. Well guys, that's chapter 1. Thank you for watching this video. We're going to do many more videos just like this in the very near future. And we're going to get this whole book out there to you guys. And so please, if you're new, subscribe to this channel. We will go through all of this book together. And go ahead and hit the like button and share this with your friends and family. God bless you, friend, and we'll see you soon.